Denver, let me bring you in here. I want to play Jim Jordan, and not from like months ago or a year ago when maybe he still had hurt feelings about the results of the election, but literally this morning. Here he is, not willing to say the election wasn't stolen.
Why would you say to Ken Buck that the election was stolen in 2020? That was not stolen. Do you still think you'll? Excuse me.
Denver, you were an investigator on the January 6th committee. That man, Liz Cheney, blames in large part for what happened. She said he knew what was coming, didn't warn his colleagues or even his own staff, presumably, and yet he had to run with everyone else. What do you make of the fact that this man, who is an insurrectionist, or at least insurrection curious, is the person 200 Republicans think should be the speaker? He still won't say the election was legitimate.
I think, watching that, Joy, sometimes I get pretty blunt. But it almost seems like he's a remora fish that doesn't want to piss off his great white shark, which is Trump. I mean, the fact is that I saw the evidence. Liz is correct. I saw that. I was the first one to see the text message. If you think about it, Joy, I was the first one to see it besides Jim and besides Mark Meadows. And when I saw that text message, I realized pretty quickly where it came from. I think a lot of people need to realize the fact that Jim Jordan was getting his messaging from QAnon believers, from some of the craziest individuals. So let's just put aside for a second, even if we don't call it an insurrection, do we want somebody leading a conference that actually believes in the craziest things, that weaponizes insanity or monetizes insanity or protects somebody like Donald Trump, who was well behind, who we know was behind instigating this type of ridiculous on January 6th. And I know it's unprecedented what happened with the speaker vote and what happened with McCarthy, but I don't think it's a shock. I don't think it's a surprise. I think you talked about MAGA Republicans. I've tried to keep away from saying that at times, but now we're looking at 200 of some of my former colleagues, some who voted to actually not object to the electors that were voting for Jim Jordan because they're afraid. I think we have a cowards caucus now. I don't think there's anybody there who can rise up against their base and actually push back on how bad January 6th was. And the fact is, I saw the data. I do have an inside track on what happened, and I think it's egregious. I think it's something we have to actually address right now, that we can't have the unserious and those who think that what happened on January 6th was just some kind of tourist visit actually voting for what's happening in this country. And I just think people who believe in fantasy shouldn't be voting on policy.
Denver, let me ask you this, because, one of the roles that Speaker Pelosi played on January 6th, she was frantically calling the vice president, checking as to his safety. She had to scramble to shore up security in the Capitol and do what she could. The president wasn't helping. You, as somebody who investigated this crime against our country, what do you make of the idea that Jim Jordan could be the person responsible for the security of the Capitol, when, as you said, he gets his information from Trump and QAnon and doesn't believe the election was legitimate? That person would then be in charge of the safety of all 435 members of Congress? Is that something that you can even wrap your mind around?
It's terrifying to the sane, and it's terrifying to the rational. How could you have somebody like the Speaker of the House who voted to object to the electors? And if you think about what does that vote mean, Joy, it means it's somebody who believed that either Italian satellites switched the vote, or they were burning ballots in white vans, or there was a broken algorithm, or the NSA was involved, or the CIA was involved, or they were routing it to Chinese servers, or we had quantum financial system watermark ballots, which Jenny Thomas texted in one of her first texts to Mark Meadows. You have to believe that tripe, that ridiculousness, in order to go up there on the floor of Congress and vote against the electors on January 6th, the night after that violence. And to me, it's mind-boggling. And it's almost as if, I don't want to get crazy here, but it's almost as if ignorance has been weaponized on a level that's hard for us to stop. And when you have 200 of some of my former colleagues voting this way again for somebody like Jim Jordan, who can't even say the election was stolen, you played that clip today because he's afraid to piss off the base, or he's afraid to make little Trump mad in MAGA land over there in Mar-a-Lago. I just got a feeling right now that there's got to be some kind of push towards rationality and sanity. And I think right now, somebody like a McHenry or somebody like that is sort of a consensus pick, is the way to go.
Let me just put up a list of the last Republican 5 speakers. Of course, Kevin McCarthy lasted, not too long. Paul Ryan, John Boehner, who's sort of the last sort of normie Republican speakers. And, of course, Newt Gingrich, who blew up Congress because that was his role. And then Dennis Hastert sticks out. And we know the scandal of sex abuse crimes and hush money that took him down. And yet Here is Elise Stefanik, who is the conference chair of the Republican Party, Sahil, talking about Jim Jordan today.
Whether on the wrestling mat or in the committee room, Jim Jordan is strategic, scrappy, tough, and principled.
Sahil, we know that Jim Jordan's other scandal is the allegation that he turned a blind eye to sex abuse when he was an assistant coach in Ohio. Is the Republican conference, are they having any conversations about even the way they publicly present his candidacy? Because if that's the sales pitch, and she got laughs by saying that, internally, is there anyone coordinating this effort other than Sean Hannity?
Yeah, Joy, I was in the chamber at the time, and I heard the shouts and oohs from the Democratic side of the aisle when Elise Stefanik brought up Jim Jordan's wrestling past. Yes, this is an issue that Jordan's critics on the Democratic side have pointed out, but I got to tell you, it's not really registering on the Republican side. It's not an issue for Jordan's opponents. None of them have really cited that as a basis for voting against him. Jordan has denied the allegations. And I do want to mention, you guys are talking about the Republicans and the divisions within the party. There's all this talk about a Republican civil war. The war is over. The MAGA forces have won. We've seen the critics of Donald Trump and the MAGA movement slowly banished from the party, slowly being excommunicated and leaving. They're right now negotiating the terms of the surrender. And what we saw today is 20 members saying they're not going to do an unconditional surrender. They're not just going to roll over after they feel their side was badly mistreated, Joy.
Sahil Kapoor and former Congressman Denver Riggleman, what a time to be alive. Thank you both very much.